What if an integrative approach is so much more than common factors? Are there special and unique patterns that you can distinguish in therapy that will help you to build and establish an integrative approach? Welcome to The Art of Therapy, Season 3, Episode 26.
So last time we really started to have a look at pausing and just actually starting to see what is the common factors between all the different modalities, and looking at the how of therapy and about how it gets delivered and how that actually determines the efficacy of therapy. And that it is, of course, it doesn't take away from the different modalities, but it does set a groundwork for therapists from all modalities to work from. And how important that is.
Yes. I think it really sensitizes the therapist for how they're doing things and also guiding them, because they're the common factors we've looked at which really make the difference. So it really sensitizes and shows us just how important our interaction, our relationships, our interaction are. That is just so central in the therapy process. It's part of the art of therapy.
So we said that we looked at the common factors now, and then we said that maybe that we have a look at what is some of the other aspects of art therapy that makes it the art of therapy.
Yes. All right, let's look at one or two principles. I say one or two because this is we really go into it in much more advanced training. So this is by way of introduction. So let's just look at one or two principles.
Okay.
The key thing to consider here is, once one understands therapist, the common factors, is next understanding this principle. And that is that, generally speaking, as human beings, it is our capacity to identify and recognize patterns.
Okay.
That is an absolute key skill in anything we do as human beings, as therapists. And so what the first step is in identifying or recognizing a pattern. The second step is utilizing, expressing that pattern in some way. And really at higher orders, it's creating or making or building that pattern.
Okay.
But that's at the highest level. So it's our ability to spot the pattern, identify it, or recognize it, then utilize it, and then create pattern at the highest logical level. Okay. So wow.
Sounds very complex,
yes. So if one just considers here, we've been exploring together and discussing some of the major developments in psychotherapy, and in a way that's just the tip of the iceberg because there's so much more. But if we just for a moment just consider these developments and how they've unfolded, what are some of the patterns that emerge? And I think as a therapist, if one can see this, recognize it, that's going to be key. Okay. So if we just look at the outset of the field, we began looking at Freud and some of his remarkable work in psychoanalysis. And really what he was getting at is understanding those internal processes, and those considered to be the psyche, the id, ego, superego, those unconscious processes. And then we saw the development with Jung and analytical therapy, and how Jung began to investigate other unconscious processes, the collective unconscious, the beautiful work there. And so one sees there then investigations into the unconscious mind. Then we've explored Anna Freud and some of the work that she did, beginning to look more at the defenses, ego defenses, and which are part conscious, but also unconscious. But we see the move there to now beginning to move from investigating unconscious processes, the move towards more conscious processes as well. It's hybrid integration, a combination. But we see the move there. Then we looked at object relations and the developments there, which incorporate both aspects of the unconscious mind, or what's considered, and aspects that are perhaps more, or can be more, the more awareness of. But again, working and expressing that. And then we began to look at, yes, attachment theory. So one can see that move here with is towards increasing conscious processes. And as we've explored, understanding early attachment experiences and being able to identify that in adulthood, being able to work with that in a meaningful therapeutic relationship. Wow. So the important thing is all of these developments really explore what's occurring in someone's psyche, and with beginning with unconscious parts of the psyche or mind, and beginning to move more and more into the conscious. And so that's a key development. And as we've noted before, but one can understand it more clearly now, that would be considered an intrapsychic, intra being within, and psychic meaning mind or soul. So these processes, conscious and unconscious, thought to exist in someone, and at the level of mind, that's causing or determining their behavior. So that was an exceptional phase of development. Then we began to move into the behaviorist approach. We explored classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and the main principle there in the behavior therapy, it being that focusing on behavior, not looking at internal subjective processes. And we know that will go to as interpsychic, between what? Between people. And so the behavior between minds or people. And so now we see a move to an interpsychic approach. What's interesting, though, when we consider the behavioral approach, is that not only is it interpsychic, but if we now look at what's the model of causality, what are these two approaches, the psychodynamic and the behaviorist approach, have in common? Yes, they both differ in terms of one process with the mind, intra, the other one inter. But what do they have in common? They tend to punctuate or look at causality in a linear way, with a psychodynamic being processed in the mind, causing behavior, and in behaviorist approach, more factors in the environment, causing or determining through a learning process how the individual responds or reacts to the stimuli. I'm really simplifying it, but the point is to start seeing these patterns. Then we began to look at some of the other developments that unfolded. We explored Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how the importance of expression of needs, how that, and different kinds of needs. Again, that's going to have an intrapsychic quality. We also then began to look at other aspects, the person-centered approach with Carl Rogers, very much intrapsychic, looking at that process of self-actualization for each individual, becoming the best and the most that one can be, while in that process of self-actualizing, also trying to maintain positive regard from others, acceptance, and having positive regard for self. Wow. But the important thing here to recognize is these are intrapsychic processes, things that we think are happening for the individual. We also then looked at the existential approach, the meaning of life, and what that means in terms of our capacity to cope with horrific traumatic circumstances where we're not in control, but it's our own thinking, our attitude, our way of responding. and that's part of the human spirit. Part of that is also an intrapsychic. So, yes, we start to see these clear patterns. Then we began to explore CBT, and first wave being considered some of the behaviorist developments. But we then looked at second wave, and what does that mean? We looked at third wave. And in this process, we see acceptance and commitment therapy. We looked at DBT. And what is occurring there to recognize is that these and the therapeutic approach here is very much about working with cognition, the way people are thinking. Of course, there's a behavioral element, but the core part of that approach is thinking about this from an intrapsychic perspective. And wow, what a difference it makes.
Psychotherapy is not only a profession, it's a state of being. And for that, it requires continuous learning, training, and refining your skills. If you would like to become better in your role as a psychotherapist, come and join Dr. Warwick Phipps for in-person training at Treatment Works Centre, where you will experience training like never before from a thought leader and expert in psychotherapy. If you would like some more information on our training or to book a training session, please visit the link in the description. And also, if you find these podcast episodes meaningful, please subscribe to The Art of Therapy. It's actually amazing to look at it. It's the intra, it's the inside. It's what the person is experiencing, either subconsciously or consciously.
Yes.
All of our thoughts, it's everything that's inside of a person.
Yes. Yes.
That is the intrapsychic perspective.
Right.
And then the behavior therapy, that was a little bit different, and that looked between people. It looked at an interpsychic perspective.
Yes. Quite different.
It's different. It's very different.
We also had noted, because it's just a key development, the systems approach and what developed there. And a cornerstone of that was the understanding around causality, that we don't just have linear causality and straight line. We've also got circular causality. We've got recursion, where one effect or one thing impacts on another, where causes become effects and effects are causes. Everything's circular. And what that showed, as soon as one understands circular causality, is a system. Because then how you and I behave on our own, for instance, as parts, and how we behave together can be very different. So the whole is other than the sum of its parts. The whole is on a different logical level. So when we're looking at something in terms of circular causality, we're looking at the relationship, we're looking at the interaction, and it can't be reduced to just the parts or how someone behaves on their own. When we look at how they're behaving on their own or a different context, we're now looking at the behavior of parts or in a different context or relationship. But these are different orders of which we look at and understand the world around us. So what that really means for us is, as we look at some of the key developments, we can begin to see and distinguish patterns. Is the approach more intrapsychic or is it more interpsychic? Is it more in terms of its understanding of causality? Is it drawing on the assumption of more linear causality? Or is it looking at it more circularly? And when a therapist begins to see this, actually therapy becomes alive because you see all the different therapeutic approaches. One can readily see that behavior therapy is interpsychic between people, but strong elements of linear causality. Again, this doesn't make it wrong or right. It's just that that lens is going to give a particular look. When you're working with systems and looking at interaction, it's both interpsychic, what's occurring between people, and what is it about their relationship, their interaction that's occurring when they're together? What is that special quality to the interaction? And so one is looking at the whole or wholeness. And that's going to be very different to looking at how that individual is or behaving on their own. If one takes psychodynamic again, you can see that it has a strong intrapsychic and strong lineal qualities in terms of thinking of causation. If one looks at narrative therapy, we've spoken about that. Narrative therapy really looks at the stories the individual's telling and what's the meaning of that story for the individual and how representative is it of their reality and their lived, when I say their reality, their lived experience. Again, one can see there's a strong intrapsychic aspect to that. Of course, how that narrative comes about is looked at circularly, but the quality of the therapy will often move towards understanding the meaning of that for the individual and a return to individual therapy. So once the therapist can begin to draw these distinctions and see, is this more intra or inter? Is it lineal or non-lineal? These are four very different frames of reference and they're not comparable. So what one sees when using the lens of circular causality or whole, you're going to see some special emergent quality of the interaction. You're going to be able to describe that. If you were to look at that in a linear way, you're going to look at a specific behavior. It's not either or, it's both.
It's both.
Same with intra-inter. These are two different frames. They're not two sides of the same coin. If the therapist is going to limit the description to what is observed without going further with speculating, that is an interpsychic. If they want to try and understand what's occurring unconsciously or consciously, they still can only work on behavior, but now they're going to, on the basis of that behavior, start inferring about possible psychological, subjective processes. It's not wrong or right. There's we need to try to understand the consciousness and where indicated unconscious processes. But it's important to know when one is doing it. And whatever therapeutic approach you're going to utilize is going to give you a specific lens. And the art is in figuring out what lens am I using, because that lens is going to help determine what you're seeing and what you're able to do.
It actually just creates so much clarity to be able to say, okay, I'm working from a intrapsychic perspective, and this is what I'm going to see, and these are the patterns in it.
Yes.
And this is how I'm gonna work with the patterns.
Yes.
And if you can describe, are you working from an intrapsychic perspective, or are you working from an interpsychic perspective, it will just, like I say, it's not wrong or right. It's just different.
Exactly. The more one can understand or identify the lens in this way, the more helpful it becomes. And again, one is not better than the other, even though it's so tempting. The therapist would say, I've got this, and this is what I do. But it's really by analogy, like comparing and saying which is better. Is sight better? The sense of is in terms of senses, is vision or sight better than hearing or audition? No. And you may say no, but absolutely, one's got to have vision. That's more important. And we often feel we have preferences. We really feel that one of our sensory modalities is more important. But create a different context. Let's say someone's in a cave and it's completely dark. There's no light. Then in that context, vision is not helpful, but what will be helpful is immediately touch. And the more effective one is able to register with touch and proprioception, the more meaningful it'll be. Then very quickly hearing and audition is going to become important. What is the echo? What does that tell us? What are we hearing? How does that lead us out? What do we even smell can be something that seems so unimportant as a sense sometimes can become really key in smell in that cave. What are we smelling? What is that some way out? Does that have to do with water, change in odor? What does it tell us about the point is These are incomparable. We need all our senses. And similarly for the therapist. The more they understand the modality in terms of what is the lens that's being utilized, and the more the therapist, of course, first consolidates in a modality. I think that's, every therapist does that. And you just feel really confident in it, and that's really important. But the other aspect of development is start reaching for other modalities, but understanding, not just picking up in an eclectic way. How does what I'm doing and what I'm learning, how does that fit? And so, for instance, let's say one is trained in working interactionally. You may recognize, okay, but here's a situation in terms of really developing and working with potentially difficult, dysfunctional thoughts and how to help someone overcome that. Well, that is going to require a really meaningful CBT and going into that. But it's, again, there's no one most meaningful therapeutic approach. So the more one understands the modality and what lens one is using here, now you're seeing the pattern. And then you can start to combine and create patterns. Because remember, we spoke, it's not just spotting the pattern, you're creating. And if you can go back to EMDR, what we did on the first order was go, what is EMDR? But now, how does it look if we look at it from another therapeutic modality, from a hypnosis modality? And suddenly we begin to see something else. It's like that with all therapies.
It's not just that one.
Yes, indeed. And of course, then, as we've been exploring, it's how that therapeutic modality, even in an integrated way, is being expressed by way of the common factors that are just key to the how of any therapeutic approach.
My sense is just that if a therapist can understand from what, are you working from an intrapsychic perspective or are you working from an interpsychic perspective, it creates clarity and it creates less confusion and it brings clarity.
Yes.
Or the same from a linear or circular causality. It creates clarity and direction, and it can make your therapy so much more precise.
Yes, it does. And it's in a way, it's quite abstract. It seems so simple and obvious, but it's also, it's not so. But the more you just reflect on it and know and become aware, that's the first step. And then as you start to expand and want to develop in other modalities, but understanding how and what is it about that modality that relates in an integrative way here.
Then you can start combining that.
Yes.
I know that you said that the integrative part is really just looking at one or two principles, because it is actually, it's so abstract and it's so complex as well. And I think it's really meaningful. And I think I just reflect back on some of the training that we really just went into more detail, and it's not possible to cover that in a podcast.
No.
So there's so much more, and it's so meaningful as well. But just to be able to understand just these principles initially already brings a perspective of how does an integrative approach look like.
Yes, I appreciate what you say. And also what you note is that it's in effect a start, just the beginning. As soon as one can understand as a therapist, that's already something. Yes.
But I'm also wondering is that, we've looked at so many modalities, but in each modality, there's also so many techniques.
Yes.
And maybe that can be something that we can look at as well and explore together. But maybe we should pause that for the next season.
Yes, I go with that. I think if we begin to explore some of that, that's exciting, because one gets to see now that application and understand it with what the therapist knows, and as we've been exploring this frame of reference. So yes, getting into more of the technique, I like the sound of that.
Okay, and then we'll see next season again.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on The Art of Therapy. If you found this episode meaningful, or if it expanded your knowledge, we would love to hear from you in the comments section. We are looking forward to continuing this journey with you. Until our next episode.